On July 2, 2025, a seismic shift rocked the global metals market. Aluminary Alouette, backed by Rio Tinto, unveiled a $1.5 billion upgrade to its Quebec aluminum smelter, locking in a long-term electricity deal with Hydro-Quebec. The move sent shockwaves across the U.S. economy, just one day after former President Donald Trump announced a 50% tariff on steel and aluminum imports during a fiery campaign stop in Pennsylvania. Overnight, the Midwest aluminum premium soared 54% to a record $1,325 per ton, sending U.S. manufacturers into panic mode. But while America braced for higher prices, Canada pivoted fast. Ottawa's investment isn't just about production, it's a foreign policy weapon. With power from clean hydro sources and locked-in energy rates, Quebec's low-carbon aluminum is now in high demand, especially in Europe and Asia. In fact, EU and Asian buyers are locking in pre-tariff deals with Canada, bypassing costly US supplies. Meanwhile, US automakers and aerospace firms are facing a tough choice: absorb skyrocketing input costs or reroute supply chains, risking production delays and higher consumer prices. Trump's tariff gamble backfires. In 2025, Donald Trump rolled the dice with a high-stakes move, a 50% tariff on foreign aluminum and steel. It was meant to protect American industry, but it quickly backfired. Nearly 44% of America's aluminum is imported from Canada, its closest ally and primary supplier. So when the tariffs hit on June 4, the consequences were immediate. By the next day, June 5, U.S. aluminum premiums skyrocketed to 58 cents per pound. That's an increase of $279 per ton, in just 24 hours. Factories were stunned. Automakers, aerospace manufacturers, and packaging companies suddenly faced massive cost hikes, with no easy alternative. But Canada wasn't caught off guard. Ottawa fired back with a response that was fast, focused, and strategic. Canada's Industry Minister, Melanie Joly, publicly condemned the tariffs, calling them illegal and unjustified. She declared that Canada was now operating in what she called solution mode. Within days, Ottawa announced a bold $10 billion support package, designed to protect Canadian smelters, stabilize aluminum output, and prevent widespread layoffs in key industrial towns. It wasn't just about economics, it was about resilience. Canada turned a trade crisis into an opportunity to solidify its role as a trusted, low-carbon aluminum supplier for Europe and Asia. As global supply chains shift and tariffs reshape trade alliances, one country is quietly rising to the top: Canada. Thanks to clean hydroelectric power and stable pricing, Canadian aluminum has become the metal of choice for the global market. European Union negotiators have amended trade agreements to secure long-term access to Canadian supply, insulating themselves from volatile US prices. Meanwhile, smelters across Asia are quietly tearing up contracts with American suppliers and rerouting shipments to Quebec. The port of Saguenay in Quebec has become a strategic hub. Upgraded in early 2025, it now handles vessels over 69,000 tons, all without touching US soil. In fact, May 2025 saw Canadian exports to non-US countries jump 5.7%, reaching a record $60.8 billion Canadian dollars. Canada's unrefined gold exports to the UK surged 30.1%, a move that stunned global commodity traders. New crude oil shipping routes have opened to Singapore, giving Canadian oil fresh access to Asian energy markets. At the same time, pork exports to Japan expanded significantly, while pharmaceutical sales to Italy gained surprising traction. From specialty drug makers in Montreal to quirky manufacturers like mascot costume makers in British Columbia, Canadian SMEs are stepping onto the world stage. By using trade deals to reduce dependency on the US, Canada is quietly building an export machine that's cleaner, more diversified, and increasingly unstoppable. Green tech and energy markets. Canada's strategic rise. In 2025, Canada has proven that global leadership in raw materials isn't just about what you mine, it's about how you produce it. And more importantly, what values power that production. At the center of this transformation is aluminum, one of the world's most essential industrial metals, used in everything from cars and planes to solar panels and smartphones. But while many nations rely on fossil fuel-heavy production methods, Canada has redefined the game. Hydropower, not coal, is fueling Canada's aluminum smelters. This clean, renewable energy source not only provides price stability through long-term energy contracts, but also grants Canadian producers valuable low-carbon credits on the global stage. In an era where climate accountability and emissions reporting are becoming prerequisites for global trade, that makes Canadian aluminum not just cheaper, but smarter. Yet Canada's ambitions don't end at aluminum. The country is pouring over 700 million Canadian dollars annually into research and development across Quebec. This isn't just a bet on raw materials, it's a blueprint for green industrial transformation. From electric vehicle battery components to sustainable aviation fuels, Canadian R&D is setting the stage for a future where clean technology isn't an exception, it's the standard. And the ripple effects are real. Aluminum smelters are among the most electricity-intensive facilities on the planet. Shifting more production to Canada, where energy comes from hydro rather than hydrocarbons, means less demand for fossil fuel-generated power in traditional hubs like the US Midwest. That shift has consequences, not just for electricity prices or oil demand, but for entire regional energy economies. When energy-intensive manufacturing moves north, power demand drops south. That rebalancing could influence wholesale electricity markets, shift oil consumption patterns, and even factor into central bank decisions on inflation, interest rates, and monetary tightening. What began as a response to aluminum tariffs has become a far-reaching transformation, one that touches clean energy, national competitiveness, and the global price of oil. Trade war or trade win? When former President Donald Trump announced a 50% tariff on foreign aluminum in June 2025, the move was billed as a defense of American industry. But within days, it became clear that this economic gamble was boomeranging in real time. America imports nearly 44% of its aluminum from Canada. So when the tariff hammer came down, US buyers had nowhere else to turn. Aluminum premiums surged, spiking by $279 per ton overnight, and industrial buyers were suddenly caught between soaring input costs and supply chain chaos. The results were swift and brutal. The US Manufacturing Purchasing Managers Index, PMI, plunged to 45.6, a clear signal of contraction. Export orders collapsed to 40.2, the lowest since the height of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. The very industries the tariffs were meant to protect, automotive, aerospace, construction, were now fighting to survive the cost explosion. But while American factories slowed, Canada accelerated. Ottawa unveiled a three-phase response that was anything but reactionary. It was strategic, proactive, and quietly revolutionary. Phase 1. Protect domestic production. A $1.5 billion investment was committed to upgrading a major Quebec smelter, locking in long-term capacity and anchoring Canada's dominance in the aluminum supply chain. Phase 2. Reroute global logistics. Ports like Saguenay and Duncan were upgraded to handle massive vessels and establish direct shipping lines to Europe and Asia, bypassing US choke points entirely. Phase 3. Use diplomacy to outmaneuver tariffs. Canada leveraged its clean production and stability to offer tariff-free, low-carbon aluminum contracts to EU and Asian buyers. The demand was immediate. International manufacturers rushed to secure long-term deals at pre-tariff rates, effectively turning Canada into a go-to supplier while the US struggled with the fallout of its own policy. This wasn't a trade war anymore. For Canada, it was a trade win. The bigger picture: tariffs as leverage, not burden. This story goes far beyond the metal market. It's about geopolitical leverage and a reimagining of how nations can respond to protectionism with innovation, not retaliation. In just a few months, Canada has turned Trump's tariffs into an engine for industrial growth, green tech leadership, and global trade influence. And that influence is growing. As traditional manufacturing hubs in the US falter under the weight of their own policies, Canada is becoming a magnet for global supply chains, not just in metals, but in pharmaceuticals, clean energy components, and advanced manufacturing. Consider this: in May 2025 alone, Canada's exports to non-US countries surged by 5.7%, hitting a record-breaking 60.8 billion Canadian dollars. These weren't just bulk materials. They included high-value shipments like unrefined gold to the UK, crude oil to Singapore, pork to Japan, and pharmaceuticals to Italy. Small and medium-sized Canadian businesses, long dependent on US buyers, are now breaking into new markets through trade frameworks like CPTPP and CETA. What began as a shield against US tariffs has become a ladder into global relevance. And yet, the most decisive moment still lies ahead.